Nina G, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I said us, I guess it's just me, but so I wanted to have you on because you're somebody who I think is having a big impact in the stuttering world, and yeah. So let me give a little intro into things for anybody that does not know your backstory. So you have a new book out called Stutter Interrupted, and you had you had contributed in another book, Stammering Pride and Prejudice. Is that correct?
I did, yes.
You have been a stand-up comic for about 10 years or so, from what I understand.
10 years, just this past couple months.
Gotcha. And I know on YouTube, you got, I don't know the exact count, but well over 1 million views for some of your work on there. So, you know, a lot of YouTubers spend their whole life trying to get to 5,000. So that's pretty impressive. So you've, just kind of some other places where you've been interviewed or featured. You've been on NPR, you've been on BBC, Psychology Today, TEDx, Howard Stern. It's a nice.
Howard Stern, it's his news show, not Howard Stern, but Howard Stern News.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, it's still pretty sweet. And you have a doctorate in psychology, from what I understand.
Yep, all of that stuff.
Which probably helps you write jokes, understanding the human psyche a little bit,
Yeah, and also psychology. There's a lot to kind of break down there because the history of psychology hasn't always been friendly to some communities. So I think it's important to be critical of that as well.
Well, so the human psyche is far from a simple thing, and I think at times in history, psychologists have thought they had it all figured out, what's going on in there, but as it turns out, there's a lot of nuance,
Yeah, and on stuttering especially. So
right.
We can eventually get to that, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything else on your background, like you'd like to fill in the blanks that I missed?
One new thing that I'm working on, and this has been since the quarantine. Right now, we're kind of like 6 weeks into the quarantine. So the way that I'm spending my time is I have a new project called the Comedy Time Capsule, which you can get at comedytimecapsule.com, where I'm interviewing comedians kind of about their own oral history before the quarantine and COVID during this time period, and then what they think is going to happen after. So it's just a way that me, as a big comedy nerd, I've been a comedy nerd all my life. It's a way that I can kind of engage in comedy because the thing that I love is right now suspended.
Gotcha. And so jumping into that, so you were a comedy fan going back all the way to when you were a teenager, right? Maybe even earlier.
No, from when I was like 5 or 6.
Okay.
Like I have stuffed animals that I named Gilda Ratner, who was, of course, you probably know, but some of your viewers might not. She was among the first cast of Saturday Night Live, and I have a sock puppet that I named Dita Than after a Lily Tomlin character. So just my whole lifespan I've been a comedy fan longer than I've stuttered, so it's been like that.
That's definitely a valuable thing when you can find something you really love in life, because I know plenty of people who never really stumbled upon that thing that they think they'd love to do the rest of their life, and just kind of end up falling into something. Um, but for a long time, you were not pursuing that dream. You had the dream. From what I had heard from listening to you on another podcast, you were already kind of writing jokes and looking up where were open mics and such when you were a teenager. But it took a while for you to take the plunge. All the way, like you're in your mid 30s, right? When you took the plunge.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. The first time that I got up on stage, I was 36. But when I was a kid, like 11, 12 years old, I discovered that I wanted to be a comedian. Um, and I would read like all kinds of books. I would record. This is back in like VCR days. How old are you, Mike? May I ask?
I'm 43.
Okay, so I'm a little bit older than you, but we're kind of, and so you know what a VHS tape is. So I would record.
Yep.
Yeah. So I would record all kinds of comedy, HBO things, Johnny Carson, David Letterman on a VCR, and then I'd watch it, and I read books on it, and then I started to write jokes, and then as I got into my in my high school years, I would research where the open mics were, anticipating that one day I might be able to get up on stage. And just like around the age of like 17ish, the dream died. And it wasn't because, it's my jokes were really, really bad, but that wasn't why. And it wasn't because I couldn't find open mics. I could. It was that I was like, well, I stutter and I can't do this because you gotta be fluent. And, back in our day, there wasn't Drew Lynch. There wasn't the internet where you could see a variety of people. There weren't groups like the NSA Kids and Teens and Friends and Say and all these wonderful organizations. So I really didn't have the role models. One of the first people that I met within the stuttering community was John Allback, who had started Friends, but at the time he was working at the National Stuttering Project, which is the precursor to the NSA, the National Stuttering Association. And when I met him, he was a teacher. I was like, oh, I could be a teacher? Okay, I'm going to go do that then. And so kind of put me on a different path. But in terms of comedy, they're like, well, I can't do it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to do other stuff. But I never stopped liking comedy. And whenever I had to write papers in college or in graduate school, it would always find my way back to comedy. So there's papers that I wrote on the First Amendment and on the Marx Brothers and stuff like that. So, so that love was always there. When I was 35, I went to a conference. It was my second NSA conference. The first one, I was 19 and I volunteered, and like I was there, but I wasn't there. I was more of an observer. But I was there for the one in Arizona. There were two in Arizona, so I called this one Arizona one. And when I was there, I realized, I felt that the stutter wasn't holding me back in my job, and I felt like I had that in check. And I thought that that's all that was important. Mm. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm a whole person. And I was reminded of that at the conference.
You can make a living, so it wasn't literally killing you, but you were kind of neglecting your personal life and your dreams.
Yeah, totally. That was totally it. And I think also as a woman, oftentimes we're taught to make ourselves small. Like if we're on the bus, we are like trying to make ourselves small. And I realized at the conference how much more I did that because I'm a woman who stutters. Like it had exacerbated that. And I think a lot of times, male, female, whatever, if you stutter, sometimes you make yourself small because you don't want to take up that space, because you feel guilty about having the other person sit through your speech. And I realized that, and I realized at that conference how that impacted me in my relationships, how it and that's why the book, Stutter Interrupted, I named it that because, of course, we're interrupted all the time. But this was me self-interrupting, that I interrupted myself and my wants and my dreams and everything.
Mm.
So when I came back to my home in Oakland, California, I decided to make some changes. And within 6 months, I started doing comedy, and it was because of that conference, and it was because I was able to kind of reframe how I thought about stuttering and challenge myself in a different way. And also starting to re-engage with that thing that I loved about comedy too.
Mm. So what was it about going to the NSA meeting and being around other people that stuttered? Was it the role models that you saw? Was it just the general idea that that we don't have to just...
I think for me, what it was, and like the thing is, you don't know what's going to get you at a conference. It could be a keynote speech. It could be a workshop, but more than likely, it's not going to be those things. It's going to be 4:00 in the morning when you're in the whirlpool, in the jacuzzi, and you're talking to people. Like, that's when those moments where your life changes. It's like on just so people know, Saturday night is the big party. It's the big dinner and the dance. And you have such a stutter buzz on you, and I call it a stutter buzz, that you can't sleep. And you are in the lobby till 5 a.m. And it's just like the strangest, weirdest thing. And it's that you're hooked. It's that you are addicted to being around people who have that same experience. It's the most diverse set of people that you can find, but we all share that one thing. And that one thing is so powerful. And I remember sitting in a hotel room, and there was like 20 people in this little hotel room, and they had beer in the bathtub, like they poured ice over it. They got, all that. And I was just like looking around. I was the oldest one in the room. So a lot of 20-somethings. I had met Crystal Kubert there, who's now one of my really, really good friends. And like, I was just looking around. I was like, all of these women here, like, I would never tell them that they couldn't do something. So why am I doing that to myself?
Mm-hmm.
And
almost like you saw yourself in other people, and you could almost see yourself more objectively, like how you would see yourself if you were outside of yourself almost. I know that sounds kind of weird, but
no, it's totally that. And that is why it's so important that we are able to see ourselves, because that shouldn't just happen at a conference. That should be on TV. That should be in movies. That should be in comedy clubs. It should be in every aspect of our lives, is that we may encounter someone who is a reflection of us, but the media doesn't understand that. The media wants to represent us oftentimes as, oh, they're so inspirational. They're so great. It's those freaking videos that they put up, like, oh, listen to him read. He stutters so badly. Oh my God, the poor thing. Now look, now he sings, and it's a miracle. No, you're just tricking someone's brain. That does nothing. And that's not how we live every day. The way that we live every day is engaging in the things that that are difficult, that are hard, that are easy, that we have talents in. And so I feel that we really need to kind of create our own way, because the public and the mainstream isn't necessarily going to create that for us.
Mm. And in your case, and I think many people's case that stuttered, I know myself in high school was just completely in my shell. And if it wasn't going to, quote, come out right, then I wasn't going to say it. And so essentially, who I was completely suppressed, because I'm naturally, I have things to say, whether they're good or not, I guess it's for other people to decide. But I was totally holding all that back and not being myself. And so I wasn't giving the world an opportunity to accept me for my stuttering, because I was so busy hiding it. And I think somebody like yourself, right? And I don't know how many people that stutter have had the courage to go up on a stage, up on a stand-up stage, and put themselves out there and be like, if I stutter, I stutter, but I've got some funny stuff to say, and I'm damn well gonna say it. And, you know, even someone like a Drew Lynch, I think he was older and had an accident or something, or maybe a dog attacked him or something.
He got hit in the throat by a softball.
Okay, gotcha. So perhaps, well, if he didn't, and that was when he was maybe 19 or 20 or something.
It's been almost 10 years since that happened. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So perhaps, I'm not, he's not here to tell us what he felt in high school, but he wasn't dealing with stuttering as a child, and perhaps didn't have, you're a PhD in psychologist, I don't know, is it called fear-based learning or whatever it is, that those rough experiences that almost all of us people that stutter had as kids, those 2 or 3 or however many number of bullies really gave us hell perhaps as a kid. In my case, that's what happened. And I just decided I'm not going to give these, I'll use a nicer word than I was going to use, these jerks any extra ammo. So I'm just going to shut myself up. But that doesn't give the world the chance to get to know a person that stutters, me in that case, up until I got to a certain age. And I said, screw it. I'm an outgoing person, and I'm freaking miserable censoring myself, just shutting myself up. If somebody's got a problem with my stutter, well, they can go hang out with somebody else, no worries. But if I'm going to talk, I'm going to stutter, because I don't know how to not stutter. If I did, I wouldn't, but I don't.
And what got you in that place? Because something happened. What happened to get you there?
Yeah, so for me, it was a guy named, well, when my parents dropped me off at college at Florida State, they knew they knew at home how I was. I was a fairly outgoing, happy kid. And then they saw me around the rest of the world, and they knew how much I was in my shell. And I was begging them to not have to go off to college, because I only had 2 people in the world outside of my family that I was comfortable talking to, and they were staying local. I grew up in Atlanta. They were staying local, and I wanted to just stay local too. I wanted to stay home, because I wasn't going to go out in a world where I didn't know anybody. But they kind of made me go away to school, because they knew I needed to get out of my comfort zone. When my dad dropped me off at Florida, my parents dropped me off, my dad stopped by the head of the speech language pathology department at Florida State, or communication sciences, whatever they call it. And I don't know if begged is too strong of a word, but asked him, please help out my son in however you can, right? And they didn't know, my parents, like all of the fluent world and most of the world in general, doesn't know what exactly to do. You didn't know what to do exactly with stuttering, right? They brought me to SLPs, and it would always work in the comfortable confines with the therapist. Usually I'd get pretty fluent and control, but walk outside and it would fall apart. And that was just incredibly frustrating. Um, so he drops me off at Florida State, asks the head of the program, who was like maybe 80 years old or so, to help me out. And Dr. Ham recognized very quickly that I was completely in my shell. And so the whole first semester, he didn't introduce any speech techniques. No, nothing like that. He just brought me around campus and made me look people in the eye when I stuttered. And it was super, it probably took 1,000 times before I could do it. Because I was so used to when you get in a block, just, right? And I used to silent block a lot because I didn't like the sound of stuttering. So I was like, I'm just going to hold the sound until the damn thing comes out the way I want it to.
Wow.
So I did a lot of like, right, a lot of that. And I never imagined that you could look people in the eye when you're stuttering and they wouldn't laugh at you or walk off or whatever. I just never knew that, because that, a kid on the playground at 12 or whatever was my impression of what the whole world was going to do when I started stuttering. And so it probably took 1,000 times of me doing this and him saying, no, Michael, look him in the eye. No, Michael, look him in the eye. Maybe 10 sessions or so, 10 hours of doing that. And it was tough at first. I'm not going to say it wasn't. But eventually I realized, or I got to the point where I could just look people in the eye. And I realized 99% of people, once they figure out you got a speech impediment, that it's not just a fluent person having a brain fart, right? Which is what a lot of fluent people think at first. When you start stuttering like that, because fluent people have stuttering moments too. But for them, it doesn't mean they have a speech impediment. It means they don't know what they want to say yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so fluent listeners, when they hear that, they assume you're just a fluent person having a disfluent moment, right? So it's kind of funny to them because, well, how do fluent people usually respond when they have a disfluency? They say, oh, I can't even talk right now, right?
Yeah.
They don't freak out about it. It doesn't bring terror to them. They kind of think it's funny when they have a disfluency, right? And so I think they think that that's what we're doing at first. But anyway, so I realized when I would look people in the eye, they would figure out much quicker, like, this guy's still with me. He seems to be just finishing the sentences after these episodes, whatever they are. I guess he's got a speech impediment. Let me not be a jerk and let me sit here and listen to him. And so I realized that actually me looking people in the eye really influenced their response towards my stutter. And I realized they would sit there and listen. And I was like that was just like a lightning bolt going off in my life. I was like, I can still say what I want, even if I stutter. Maybe I'm not going to get into as much detail on every subject as I would if I were a chatterbox, but yeah, so that was it. And so I went from senior year of high school, so before the eye contact training, neither of those two friends were in my lunch period. So rather than just find a different table, I took my lunch into the bathroom stall for the lunch hour my entire senior year and lived in total fear that somebody was going to discover this, freak hiding in the bathroom for lunch, because I was trying to hide it from anybody I possibly could. I went from that to after eye contact training, and I promised myself I'm never again going to not say something just because I'm going to stutter. And so I'd raise my hand at Florida State, have a question of the professor because I was 19 and I thought I was smarter than they were. I was like, he probably hasn't thought of it, or she hasn't thought about this. Let me ask it. And then I'd think, no, but you got the stutter. And then I'd be like, nope, you promised yourself. You're never going to not say it because you stuttered. So I'd raise my hand in big lecture halls with 150 people, where the fluent people, for the most part, weren't doing that because that just wouldn't be practical for all 150 people to ask questions all hour. But I would ask you, and I would stutter, and I would look around from person to person in the eye and almost challenge them. Like I heard you mention on an NSA call a couple of weeks ago, almost like an asshole detector, right? You want to expand on your philosophy that having a stutter is like an asshole detector?
Yeah, no, and I think the disability in general is because it purges out people's assholeness. That if somebody is going to be a jerk, it like the stutter is almost like a bait, and if they go for the bait, that's a really good clue. And so and I know that I have encountered that, and sometimes people, and I think it's very important to know that we can all be assholes. I've been an asshole. I'm sure you've been an asshole. The listeners have all been assholes. It's a normal thing, but there are some people that are not very humble when they are an asshole. And if they're not humble, that's the problem. So it's when they're not teachable. And I've had lots of situations, especially in comedy. You know, I'm doing this comedy time capsule, and so I'm doing these 1 hour interviews with people on Zoom, and I've done like 15 of these. And it's been so interesting to me that not one of them has flinched when I stutter. Not one of these 15 fluent people has flinched. And part of that is that I've worked really hard in this community of comedians that they understand the way that I talk, and that I've been educating them, and I've been on them, and they know how to act, and they know like, yeah, that's just how she talks. I don't need to talk about it. I don't need to mention it. They don't do anything about it.
They just want to know what you have, like what's coming next. They want to know what you have to say, and they're listening. You know?
Yeah, no, and so like watch these videos, because this is how people should act, is just like let you wait. And also on Zoom, you know, there is a delay anyway. And like it's just been so amazing, and it's been really like satisfying as a person who stutters, that like, oh, like to see kind of how what I've tried to create, because it's really hard to create this anywhere else in my life, but I've been able to create this somewhat in comedy, because I am able to take the stage and say exactly what I want to represent in terms of stuttering. And I do it in the form of dirty jokes, but it's gotten to people that they understand it.
That makes sense. And you were talking about it's when people aren't humble in their assholeness. And I think what you're getting at is they double, like, well, and in my experience, it is really rare. Like when quite a few people almost have an instinctual reaction to us stuttering at first when they don't know what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. And like I said, because for fluent people, when they stutter, it means something. It means they're, either really nervous, they don't know what they want to say, maybe they're lying, right? I mean, for fluent people.
Or they're not smart.
Right. There's that too. Yeah. I mean, yes, there's a lot of, or they just are trying to talk before they have thought at all. They don't know what they want to say. And so something that I realized pretty early after starting to do the eye contact, because one of the things about eye contact, when you're not looking at the person, you really have no idea what their reaction is, right? I'm looking over here, you're over there. I'm doing this. I don't know what your face is doing because I'm looking over here, right? I have no idea. And I think that's probably a part of it. That's why eye contact, that's why it took 1,000 times for me to get to the point where I could make myself hang in there, because the reaction of the listener was the thing I was so afraid of, right? Like smile, laugh, condescension, all that kind of stuff. And but when we're looking at them, they figure it out sooner. And what I realized quite a lot of times in life, I've had people that first have a, you know, sort of comical reaction, but as soon as they realize it's a speech impediment, they like, 99% of people, like, it wipes that look off their face. They don't double down on their assholeness. As soon as they realize, oh God, I was being an asshole, right? This guy's got a speech impediment and I'm laughing at him. What kind of person am I? Suddenly they want to make amends for that, right? And I would guess that's probably a part of why you've been able to build up so much support for yourself in comedy, because you're facing it every time you go out there. It also projects courage and honesty that you're going up there and talking to people. And, courage and honesty are two qualities. Every culture on earth respects those things. And that's something that I think most of us, certainly including myself in high school, thought that my stutter made me, from a character standpoint, inferior, that I was less than other people. And character is not determined by whether we were born with a stutter or born deaf or born short or, not good looking or whatever, right? Character has nothing to do with things that are outside of our control. But we, or I, you shouldn't say we because that projects on everybody else in the stuttering community, but I, and from since getting involved in the support groups, this is a common theme, that sense of inferiority is debilitating, right? And I would say, and I know you're big on the iceberg, as am I think it's a great visual of what's going on, right? With the small amount above the surface, what people see, which is the blocking, and maybe.
Should I show it?
Sorry, what's that? Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, so you explain it. Oh, never mind. You have to let me show it. It's going to take too long, so just explain it.
Well, no, I'd love to see yours if you can figure it out while I'm talking. If not, no worries. But so, what's the word I'm looking for?
You were saying at the very top is what?
Right, at the very top of the iceberg is what people can see. So it's the repetitions, the facial contortions, whatever. Maybe filler words if somebody's saying, because they're trying to break that word free that they think they're going to stutter on. Those are the things that people see. But what it really is to be a person that stutters is everything underneath the surface: the guilt, the shame, the self-hate, the embarrassment, all that stuff. And so I don't know if you're able to pull yours up, but
you have to let me share the screen. So you'd have to go to that. So if you want to, you can. And so the idea is that what people see is the stutter and us trying to get out a word, but the bigger experience for people who stutter are those feelings. And it's like you have to address those feelings before you can really address your stuttering. And also keep in mind that stuttering isn't the issue. Good communication is the issue. And you can be a good communicator by looking people in the eye, by saying what you want to say. And that defines good communication, not fluency.
So, totally. And so I'm going to plead technologically ignorant here as to how to let you share your screen. I can see how I share mine. But if you want to just tell us, so essentially my understanding is that you have replaced or you have created a framework where all those guilt, shame, embarrassment that is below the iceberg, you have created a framework where that can be replaced with other things.
Yeah, and so in here it's on page 123 in my book. So we'll do it like this.
Right.
So in Sheehan, in this, Alex, my lips look really weird like this, but I'm still gonna put them in here so you guys can see a close up of any repetition. So there you go. Okay, so in Sheehan's iceberg, this one right here, that one. Okay, it's shame, denial, guilt, anxiety, isolation, fear, and hopelessness. And my whole thing is that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can reframe what those feelings are. I think that Sheehan always wanted like the water level to go down so that you had less of those feelings. I think you should be able to replace those feelings with something that you find more empowering. So when I do workshops with people, I encourage them to look at what their iceberg is now and what they want it to be. And then one example that I have, and this is broken down a bit into stammering, pride, and prejudice. And I have some questions that go along with it. So please check out that book, along with this book too. But anyway, the iceberg that I have here is, instead of denial, acceptance, shame turns to pride, anxiety to kindness, and guilt into comfort, isolation into community, fear into courage, and hopelessness into hope. And I know that for me, when I was after that one conference, I was able to see my stutter in a different way. I was able to reframe it in a different way. That because of the community that I had the courage to then go do stand up. I had less guilt and kindness to myself and to the listener too. I wasn't as angry at the listener for sometimes not getting it. And I was able to take up more of that space.
And it's with the acceptance side of it, you know, that's a nuanced point, I think, with some folks in the community, right? Like, what does acceptance mean? Right? To you, what does acceptance mean? Like when you accepted your stutter, because obviously you knew that you stuttered prior to that. It wasn't that you were probably thinking, oh, I'm a fluent person, and you're in total denial of that, right?
Yeah. Well, and also I think that we put so much pressure on having the iceberg be pride and acceptance all the time, 24/7, all the time, 100 acceptance. No, that's not realistic. I mean, like when you go into a new situation, you're going to feel some of that old iceberg stuff, and that's okay. Like, I think part of the kindness is being kind to yourself. Like, oh, wait, I know this feeling that I'm having. This is the same feeling I had in third grade. This same feeling I had in senior year of high school. This is it's the same feeling I had when I did my wedding vows and I stuttered on that. Like, this is that same thing. And that when we see it, we're able to move through it a little bit faster because we understand the process. And I think that's one of the lovely things about age is we're like, oh, been here. I have a roadmap. I can get through it a little bit faster. It's still going to suck, but I can get there. And I know that it's going to come. It come both in there's going to be a trip up and that it eventually is going to be over with.
You know you can face it and that the world is going to keep on spinning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. That and you know there were times that like a couple years ago I was stuttering a lot. Like it was just a month that I stuttered a lot. And I was stuttering, especially on D's. I was doing presentations on disability and dyslexia that I'd say like this now. I did not say it like this then. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? It's just going to happen right now. And I know that it's going to get better, but like, it just is what it is right now. And not putting like a value on it, just like, it's just there. And like, it's going to be bumpy, but then it's not going to be, and then it's going to be bumpy, and then it's not, but you just know where to go.
Almost divorcing your happiness from the extent of your stuttering at any given moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And also being a comic, I was like, okay, some weird stuff's going to happen the next month. And I got my notebook and I got my pen. So assholes come at me because I need some new material. And I got some. There was a woman that month who, when I was giving a professional, this was a professional presentation. And every time that I stuttered on a hard D, she'd do, like rolled her eyes. She's right there, like 12 o'clock, right there. And like, I ignored her the whole time. And my friend who I gave the presentation with at the end, she's like, did you see that lady? Oh my God. And then I brought it up on stage and I said, you know, I see you. I stutter, I'm not blind, I can see you, and making fun of that. But I was really pissed at her. And then when I saw her around, I would like stutter extra. I'd be like I didn't use any fluency shaping at all. I let me use the words that I know that I'm gonna stutter on. Which, like, of course, you know, then you don't stutter as much. But I still tried to stutter.
I hear you. Yeah, and that's where I love that eye contact in those situations, right? Like, being disrespectful. I see you. You know. Yeah. So that is. So you're talking about those times. Say that stage a few years ago when you were struggling on the D's a lot. And one of the things that was in your updated iceberg, if you want to call it that, was courage, right? And well, would you agree that courage comes in huge? Like courage, when you maybe are feeling the fear or feeling the frustration, or those old feelings are coming flooding back, and the old iceberg is trying to displace the new iceberg. Would you say courage becomes super crucial, which you can also lump courage maybe in with non-avoidance, right? Like,
Yeah.
I might stutter a lot, but I'm still gonna do it and say what I want to say.
Yeah, and I think like everybody kind of needs, and I'm so glad you asked this, because I think everyone needs to define courage on their own terms. I think that the way that I see it may be different from how you see it. I think sometimes courage is ordering a Diet Coke instead of a Coke, and knowing that you're going to stutter on the D. Some days that is courage. Some days it's talking in front of 5,000 people, you know, like, and that could be the same individual. I have an easier time a lot of times talking in front of large groups of people because I'm in charge there. There's a story, I'm not sure if it's in my blog or in my book. I was going to compete at a comedy competition, and I had a bunch of friends in my car, and I wanted a Diet Coke at the McDonald's on the way to the club because I needed some caffeine. And I told everybody in the car, I'm like, okay, I'm driving. Does anybody want anything else? Tell me right now. Tell me right now what you want. And they're like, no, I don't want anything. And they didn't know that that question had an underlying stuttering component. They were just like, And then when I got up there, they started barking out stuff, and I froze. I couldn't do it. And my friend Roman was in the front seat. I'm like, Roman, go, do it. And so then he ordered. And then I went on to win the comedy competition that night. But my friends were really confused, like why I couldn't speak in that moment, but I speak all the time on stage. And the thing is, like, oh, should I beat myself up because I wasn't courageous in that moment? No, it's just, you know, sometimes stuff happens, and that's okay. That's fine. It's just going to happen.
Roll on, you know. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of it too. And I don't, I snapped a photo of your iceberg. Let me remind myself all the words that were there. Yeah, so forgiveness, I think, is a big concept too,
Oh,
right?
that
And
needs
you
to be in
allude
the iceberg. Write that in the iceberg, everybody. Get my book and then put in for forgiveness and then Mike's name. Okay, because that's a good one.
if you get nothing else out of this podcast, you'll have forgiveness in there. Yeah, because it's both forgiving ourselves, and not that we have anything to forgive ourselves over, but we tend to be our toughest critic historically, right? By far, I would say. I mean, even then the bully say, my thought is that I bullied in the end during those years prior to basically being trained on hanging in there and saying what I wanted to say. During those childhood years, I bullied myself more than anybody outside of me ever bullied me in that sense, right? I was
And
my own
and
worst
that
enemy.
is what I did too. Was I had interrupted myself.
Mm.
And what that is that we internalize the stigmas that are around us, and that's why it's important to question what we see and what we hear about. Um, Not everything that the media represents about us is done by us. There is a disability slogan that I love, which is nothing about us without us, because for so long the disabled community has had things done onto them and not involve them in the same way the stuttering community has had these horrible images on TV and in film, and we can't take that in, and we do. It's impossible not to, but to have a community that represents something else too, that if like there's 5 crappy ways that stuttering is represented, to try to get 10 positive ways that it is represented too. And I don't mean positive like, oh, they did it anyway, good for them. No, it's like, oh, this is just a person and they stutter. That's it. It's not a thing. It's like, I have brown hair, I have my grandmother's big butt, and I talk this way. That's it. It's a neutral characteristic.
Right,
And that's it.
right. I like that, seeing it as a neutral characteristic. Um, I think that stuttering can definitely grow our character, um, because you got to develop things like courage and uh, determination, patience, all that kind of stuff. In order to get to a good place in your own mind, you have to reframe your iceberg. Right now, some people, and I've met, I've definitely met some of these folks, and there's quite a few in the stuttering support groups, and some that have just kind of figured it out over the years, right? Typically, as you mentioned, as people get older, they generally less sensitive about their own foibles or their own imperfections or whatever you want to call it, right? I don't know if that's the word to use, but right. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, but in these happiness studies that they do, and this is totally counterintuitive. Every decade of life, um, after like your young childhood, after say your first 10 years, every decade of life, people get a little happier. So seriously, into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even, people are getting happier. Now that is counterintuitive, right? Why? I mean, you have to feel worse when you're 85 in most cases, physically, than when you were 25, right? You're probably not as good looking, by most standards. You're closer to death. You've seen some of your friends die, et cetera. All sorts of reasons not to be as happy, but people get happy. Well, why would that be? Probably because have you ever met an 80-year-old who's like seriously worried about what somebody's going to think about his pants that he put on that day. No, he's like, I'm freaking 80. I don't care what the world thinks about my damn pants. Whereas a 25-year-old might be like, I think I have to change my pants because people are going to think I'm weird or I'm a loser or whatever, right? People just get less sensitive. And I think, you know, and that's something that I tell a lot of younger people that stutter that I talk to. Like, trust me, as you get more comfortable in your own skin over time and you realize who you are and you realize who other people are and that this stutter has nothing to do with your character. In fact, it's an opportunity to turn yourself into a better person than some people might find if they have nothing, quote, wrong with themselves, right? If everything comes easy, if they're always put on a pedestal, well, people, that usually doesn't develop character. Sometimes it can, but usually not. And the people that have it, challenges, big time challenges, have to, well, they have, in this case, they have to go through I don't want to say they have to, but in order to become a happy human being, they have to melt their iceberg. And that takes a certain amount of introspection, a certain amount of hard work, character, and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, and one of my friends who has a physical disability, and I was interviewing him. It's his interview is actually going to be up on the Comedy Time Capsule. His name is Michael Beers, and he is a disabled comic. He talked about how with the quarantine, he has had to adapt all of his life, and even this too, he will adapt. And that adaptation is the thing, and adaptation, I think, is that characteristic, is that character building thing that just isn't a stuttering thing, just not a disability thing, but it is a skill you can bring into the workplace. It's a skill that you can bring into a marriage and into a friendship, and it's important to adapt, but also important to keep who you are and what you want. And I think that's kind of that, it's that teeter-totter that we have to balance.
Yeah, and recognizing who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's almost, in my mind, that's almost the holy grail of happiness. I know it's a bold statement, but, you know, figuring out who you are and being determined to be you.
Well, and I think with the stutter, there's so many people who go to the stuttering conferences who are like, oh, I didn't know I was an extrovert until I got here. Because it frees you and it helps you understand who you are, because that it's that barrier of, and I don't want to say the barrier of the stutter, but the barrier of the stigma that you feel about the stutter, it goes away, and it clears you up to have that opportunity to discover more about yourself.
And that's, I mean, that's incredibly powerful, right? To find who you are and start to get comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because the thing is, no matter how, and obviously people that stutter have no monopoly on feelings of insecurity or fears, right? I mean, these are pretty universal things. I know we tend to think that our situation is way tougher. And I think something that I've gotten the impression of from talking to quite a few folks is people there's a tendency, and I know I've done it during childhood, to think, God, if I just were fluent, it would be like I was in heaven. Right?
I mean, the world, yes.
Right? Like you know, like my meals would just cook themselves and I wouldn't have to, you know, I won't go there, but I wouldn't have to, you know, do my business like everybody else and all that. Everything would just be, you know, euphoric, you know.
Yeah.
And right, and when we do that, we are essentially making fluency God, right? Like everlasting happiness and salvation is fluency. So that, first of all, most of the people I know in this world are fluent, and plenty of them are not as happy as they could be,
99%.
right? You know, and if somebody waved their magic wand and we were fluent, yeah, it would feel amazing for however long. But we, once again, we would adapt to that. We would get used to it, and we, if we're the type of person that's just going to find something to be unhappy about, we're still going to be unhappy, right? It's really about, you know, and people have their own. I mean, stuttering is not the only thing that has an iceberg, right? All sorts of people
Everything.
have all sorts of stuff below the surface that the rest of us don't see.
Yeah, no, and I think, and I, and it's this very weird thing. What we're saying is that in order for this, like we have to make stuttering a big thing to know it's not a big thing. Like, it's so counterintuitive that way, but it's totally true. And I think that is that acceptance piece, that you're like, yes, this thing, so stuttering, it's here, and look at it, and it looks like this, and there's all these different aspects, and I go to a conference for it, I have a bunch of friends for it, and now that I've done this, I'm gonna put this over here, and it's just gonna be here, and that's it. Yeah, it's over there. And it's this very strange thing that we make a big thing of it, so it's not a big thing in our lives.
Right. It's just one of our things, right? I mean, we stutter, we, you know, are a comic, we like, you know, scary movie, whatever. You know, everybody's got a ton of different qualities about themselves. And rather than this being the defining quality of who I am and the thing that's holding me back from success, happiness, all the good things of life, I can't achieve those things until I'm fluent. You know, that's putting so much emphasis on this one thing. And, you know, as I think we all know, the vast majority of people that stutter don't stutter when they're alone, right? I mean, some do occasionally. So it obviously has something to do with, well, something about who's listening tends to exacerbate. Now, that might be, maybe for some people, their feared situation is the drive-through, perhaps, or when they don't know what they want to order, and their five friends start screaming, you know, burgers, fries, mac and cheese, you know, whatever. And it can be inconsistent from day to day. Maybe one day it goes fine there, and other days not. But it's so key, I think, and as you said, by putting this thing out there, by not denying it, not saying, stuttering's not a big deal in my life at all. It's a non-issue, therefore I don't have to go to a conference. And, you know, if people don't want to, they obviously don't have to. Maybe it's not for everybody, but
Well, and I
everybody
think
out
a
there
lot of people think
goes, it
it's
feels
just
better.
people bitching, and it's not. It's fun, and it's just like, you don't need to go there thinking like, oh, I really have to work on myself. It's just like, just go, just get it over.
Yeah, by just participating in the community, by getting to know other people that stutter, there's something that it does where that sense of not being alone with this, because stuttering is, and this is one thing that's pretty unique to stuttering. There are some other conditions or disorders that are like this, but very few. Like whatever your, you know, other things, let's say, well, things that people can feel discriminated against about, whether it's gender, race, height, being bald, being this, you know, having acne, whatever, right? Whatever things. With those things, you look around and you see some other people that are like that. So you know you're not alone. Totally.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're the one, you know, person, you're the one I don't know, bald guy in your friend group. Well, you see other bald people as you walk around, at least. With stuttering, and I think even though 1% of people stutter, I never met somebody else in regular life that stuttered as severely as I have at times. And perhaps I did encounter them at a party, but they weren't talking. So I didn't know they stuttered.
And then we will conceal ourselves oftentimes, like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I'm gonna go over here and not deal with this. So there's like even missed connections that way,
Right.
that you can get.
Yeah. And by getting back to something we were talking about earlier, by saying what we want to say, even if we stutter, I mean, not even if we stutter, but saying what we have to say. If we stutter, fine. If not, fine. That in and of itself is advocacy. That in and of itself is advocacy, because people are now getting to know a person that stutters rather than just thinking you're super quiet and you just, or you're, standoffish and you just don't want to talk to them. You think you're too good to talk to them.
Well, and not to get too feminist on you, but the personal is political. And that's exactly what you just said, is that it is a political action to stutter, because it's putting it out there and it's saying that my voice deserves access and it deserves to be heard. And it's been quieted since the Bible. Since the Bible. Moses had an accommodation. God chose him, and Moses wasn't cured. I just want to make this very clear. Moses was not cured. I imagine God had the power to do that. No, God said, "Oh, I'm going to give you an accommodation," and I think that is the first on record accommodation. I would have loved for him to lead his people with his own voice, but he had to borrow a voice, just like King George had to kind of be fluent. If you're going up against Hitler, you got on the radio, then you probably had to be fluent. For us, though, we have gotten to a point where we can have our true voices be heard, and thinking about how that impacts the rest of our community. So it's not only that we are stuttering for ourselves, but we are stuttering for other people too.
Totally. And by other people, or by the fluent world hearing us, meeting us, saying, yeah, no, now the next person they may encounter that has a stutter, if they know us, they are now miles down the road. So understanding kind of what's going on. The more honest we've been, the more, or the less we've held ourselves back, the more they've heard us stutter and then finish our sentence with a good point. The more they've seen that, the more it, at least in those people's minds that heard us, that knew us or to know us, the more stereotypes are killed in their mind. Like, no, Mike, or, Nina's got a stutter, but she doesn't lack confidence, like quite the opposite, or, yeah, she's got a stutter, or he's got a stutter, but they're not dumb for sure. And so, so in a way, well, with other, call it marginalized groups, they stood up for themselves, well, largely in the 1960s, right? And then afterwards, there have been strong movements for, gender, race, etc., going back 50, 60 years at least, and even earlier in a lot of ways, right? But people that stutter largely, until really recently, and still it's a relatively low percentage, because it's a speech impediment that we have, we're not out there picketing, yelling at the White House, give me my rights, right? Or, whoever you're.
I do want to add something here. There's a wonderful film called Crip Camp that is on Netflix, and everyone should check it out because the things that we're talking about here happened at this camp for disabled kids in the 60s. And from that camp, from that community, sprang up the activists who would change the world. And those are, even though they used wheelchairs and used canes and signed and were deaf, they are part of our family, and they have advocated for us. And a lot of times just people who stutter don't want to be identified as having a disability. And I think that we hold an attitude sometimes that we have to look at in terms of our own icebergs on disability issues, that those things of shame and stigma and isolation, we project that onto the disabled community. But the fact that I went to college and I could say, you can't grade me down on my speech because I stuttered, that is because a bunch of people in wheelchairs and a bunch of people who had intellectual disabilities and a bunch of people with white canes took over the San Francisco Federal Building in 1973 and fought for my rights to be in school and to eventually get a job, and I can still get my accommodations. And we have to understand that we are cousins of people who have more apparent disabilities, and we are all part of the same family, and we can come together for the things that we need. But we have to kind of get over ourselves in that way. Right.
They paved the way essentially for us.
Totally.
And that
the
makes
accessible ramp, they paved it. And that's why we need to acknowledge that and not fight that.
Totally. And if you think about it, because they paved that way, and that was happening around the same time, right, as all these other movements were happening that really brought brought a lot more equality to the country than had existed prior to that. If you think about it, we're living in the best time ever to be a person that stutters. Because if this was 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 or 400 going all the way back, maybe I couldn't have just looked people in the eye, or couldn't just look people in the eye and say what you got to say and have them be nice. Maybe they would laugh at you or whatever. So we should, and this is sometimes a fine line. You don't want to get complacent about the advocacy, but we should also be happy that we are living in the best time ever to be a person that stutters.
And also to recognize that some countries may not be in that same position, and that we can also help to fight internationally to understand these things. And the more that we're out there and that we're online, I mean, I've talked to so many people in India about stuttering and disability, and it's just been amazing that I never thought that I could talk to people about my experience and it would impact them, and it has. And we're a small world now. And it's a really interesting time to be a stutterer in it.
I totally agree. And that's a great point, that what we're doing in the rich world, if you will, on this advocacy is absolutely going to help out a lot of people in more traditional cultures. And I've also got friends from India that stutter, in China, and Africa, and there, from what I've heard, like one of my friends from India told me a story where he was trying to order his train ticket, at the station, and there was a long line behind him. He's in India, and he couldn't get out the station that he wanted to go to. And people behind him started clamoring and saying, "What? Don't you know where you want to go, man? Say where you want to go. We got to go," like just like a crescendo of criticism from behind him in line. And he eventually just set another station that he could say, and then spent 2.5 hours walking back to this place where he wanted to go. And
Yeah.
so it's absolutely true that what we do, and getting back to that, speaking up, right? Speaking up, there's advocacy on the, if you will, more political sort of those kind of channels, which is a good thing to do. But then there's also just our personal advocacy, just saying, I got to stutter and I'm going to say what I have to say.
Changing attitudes, changing hearts and minds.
Exactly.
That's something we can all do all the time. And throw left, right politics out. I don't care. I don't think it is a political issue in terms of that. I think there are assholes on both sides, and that we can hopefully push push our it's our own acceptance into them accepting us, and even going past that and celebrating us and just neutralizing it.
Right. I totally agree with that. So, Nina, I know you got to run here. You got to go tonight.
Yes.
Speaking of continuing to pursue the dream, we'll be doing that soon. Let me make sure I didn't miss any important questions before I let you go here. So, in terms of other people out there that are still in that holding back stage, if you will, of their stuttering journey, where they're not being themselves, where they're not pursuing the dreams that they want to pursue, do you have any advice on, well, is it as simple as just going? I mean, in your case, it sounds like it was going to the conference, made some light bulbs go off, and you recognize that you had kind of been holding back on the dream for a while, and you went after it. Is there anything you can say to other people that are still at that earlier stage of their journey and are deathly afraid of what the world is going to say about their stutter if they just go out and say what they want to say and stutter? Do you have any thoughts for them as to how to push themselves forward? Go to a conference, obviously.
Go to a conference, I think, is the main thing. Find your community, and finding it may be at a conference. There are scholarships for both the Friends Conference and for the NSA Conference. So if you feel that you can't afford it, there might be a way. So check that out. Also, there are support groups that are peer run, and I think it's important to say peer run. And some are great, some could probably be improved, but I think looking at one that is more on self-acceptance rather than on fluency, because I think that is that shift in the paradigm of I have to be fixed versus I adapt to the world, and also the world has to adapt. It has to adapt back and just shut up and let me talk. So I think that's important. There are some online options as well. I think some of the Facebook forums aren't always as positive as I would like for them to be. I'm not going to name names or anything, but there are those kinds of there are the resources that are like that. Also, the American Institute on Stuttering does a lot of events that I think are more online now that also work toward more good communication and acceptance. And also a ton of NSA. We met at an NSA event online, and that's how I am here now. So to look at those resources, and you don't have to jump into the deep end. You can put a toe in and then slowly get into it.
And right now with this COVID-19 period, right, everything's online. So, I mean, right, I mean, so we met on the virtual lounge thing on a Friday night, right, that the NSA is doing during the month of May at least. I would encourage them to do that sometimes after COVID-19 ends also. But I really hope this sticks around, because right now you can go to right, I live in upstate New York, but I could go to a San Francisco virtual NSA meeting or wherever, which is pretty cool. So
Very cool. Yeah.
Time.
No, and there is stuttering stuff all around the world. There is the Indian Stammering Association. There is the British Stammering Association. I'm going to keynote at, and I hope you're there because you're already practically there at the Canadian Stuttering Association, which is going to be in Niagara Falls, Canada. So you're like 2 hours away from there, 3 hours away. What are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty close. I spoke with Lisa, I believe her name is, who's helping to put that together. So yes, I would. And that was, well, I suppose everything is slightly up in the air with COVID-19. We don't know how quickly that's going to lift, but it was supposed to be in the fall sometime, right? Like late.
November 4th or something. It's like right before the election here. So gotcha. It'll be a nice time to get to Canada so we don't have to deal with all the politics.
Right. Yep. Well, that's awesome. Well, I look forward to meeting you in person there. And thanks for joining us. Your story is, I know you don't like the word inspirational, or, but you know.
You can use it. Go ahead.
You can call me inspirational. All right. It's a good story, and you know, and I think it's a good roadmap for how to push ourselves forward to really pursue our dreams in life. And like, you know, I don't know if people like this, but the bottom line is we're all going to be dead eventually. So let's live while we're alive and do the things we want to do. You know.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. Well, thank you. It's been an honor to be your very first guest, and best of luck with all of this.
It's been an honor to have you, Nina, and good luck in your show tonight, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
So, take care.
All right. Bye for real. Okay. Take care.